I wasn't supposed to be there. That was the first thought that hit me when I woke up in that white, humming room with the pale green curtains drawn halfway around my bed. I didn't remember checking into any hospital. No fever. No crash. No panic the night before. And yet, there I was, a V taped to my arm, that familiar sterile tang in the air, and the mechanical sigh of a ventilator rhythmically hissing nearby. A nurse, late 50s, sharp eyes but kind, noticed me stirring. She smiled as she approached, but I could tell she was trying to mask surprise, like I had caught her off guard. "Welcome back," she said softly. I blinked. "Back?" She hesitated, flipped through a clipboard by the bed. "Let me just grab the doctor. He'll explain." I pushed myself up a little, wincing. My body didn't hurt. Not really. Just heavy. Disconnected. The way your limbs feel after a bad flu. I looked around. Everything was clean, calm, quiet. But wrong. Something about the silence of the ward unsettled me. It wasn't nighttime, but there weren't many sounds. No chatter, no footsteps. Just the mechanical buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. The doctor came in about 10 minutes later, mid-40s, confident, composed. The type who's learned to deliver hard news gently. "You're doing well," he said after a quick check of my vitals, "considering how long you've been here." I frowned. "How long?" He tilted his head. "Since March 2020. I blinked again. "That's a mistake. I came in yesterday." He studied me closely, like he wasn't sure if I was joking. "Your chart says otherwise," he replied, lifting the clipboard. "You were admitted with unexplained fatigue, intermittent disorientation, and periods of aphasia. You've been under low stimulation observation for nearly 3 years." I stared at him, a cold crawl slipping down my spine. "That's not possible. I live alone. I work remotely. My neighbor would have noticed. My sister—" "You don't have a sister listed on the emergency contacts," he interrupted gently. "Your primary contact is your father. He passed away in 2017. That's when I laughed. It just came out, a dry, incredulous sound. "This is a mix-up. I have my phone. Let me show you. I texted my sister last night." He stepped aside and gestured to a small tray on the far table. My belongings were in a clear plastic bag. Keys, wallet, watch. No phone. "Where's my phone?" The nurse, now standing in the corner, spoke quietly. "You didn't have one on you when you were brought in." "I always have my phone," I snapped, louder than I meant to. "I had it with me last night. I was in my apartment, watching Netflix. I made soup. I went to bed. I woke up here." The doctor said nothing, just scribbled something on his chart. "Are you saying I've lost 3 years of my life?" "We're not saying anything definitive yet," he said carefully. "But yes, that appears to be the case." I shook my head, my throat tightening. No way. This is wrong. Something's wrong here." He exchanged a glance with the nurse. "I'd like to run a full neuroevaluation," he said. "In the meantime, we'll give you some time to rest." I nodded stiffly. He turned to go, then paused at the curtain. "One question, though," he said, "before you rest." I looked up. "When you woke up this morning, were you alone?" That question, "Were you alone?" hung in the air longer than it should have. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The way he asked, it wasn't casual. It was too precise, too rehearsed, like he'd asked before and didn't like the answer. I think so," I said finally. "I mean, yes. I didn't see anyone." "Good," he replied too quickly. Then, with a nod, he left. The nurse stayed behind a second longer. She looked like she wanted to say something but stopped herself. Instead, she offered a brittle smile and pulled the curtain closed. I sat there for a while, staring at the pale green fabric swaying slightly from her movement. Rest? How was I supposed to rest? Eventually, I peeled back the blanket and stood. My legs wobbled, but I managed. There was a mirror on the far wall, the kind hospitals love, cold metal frame, harsh fluorescent glare above it. I walked over, one step at a time, and studied myself. I looked older. My hair was thinner, my eyes duller, but not 3 years in a hospital older. I didn't believe it. I went to the door and pushed. It opened easily. Outside, the hallway was dim, painted that same institutional beige that always looks sick under bad lighting. No nurses at the station, no gurneys or carts. Just silence. I walked a little, barefoot on cold linoleum. Room 212, 214, 216. Each door shut. No voices behind them, no light. At the end of the hall was a small lounge, 2 plastic chairs, a vending machine humming softly, and a large window looking out over a darkened city. The sky outside was cloudy, bruised. I pressed my hand against the glass, trying to ground myself. That's when I saw the figure. Across the street, standing beneath a flickering lamppost, was a man. Or at least, something man-shaped. Too still, too shadowed. Facing up, toward the hospital. Toward me. I blinked, stepped back. He didn't move. I turned around and walked quickly back toward my room. My heart was hammering. Inside, I found a nurse, not the same one as before, checking the monitors. "You're not supposed to leave the room," she said without looking up. "I needed air." She gave a tight smile and finished what she was doing. As she moved past me, I whispered, "Do people ever see things after waking up here?" She froze mid-step, just for a second, then kept walking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the air vent buzz in and out like shallow breathing. Somewhere down the hall, a door clicked. Footsteps echoed faintly, but no voices followed. Around 3 a.m., I got up again, not to wander, just to think. There was a small table near the window in my room, with a folder on it, the kind used for patient files. I don't know why I hadn't noticed it before. Inside were photocopied forms, discharge summaries, psych evaluations, medication logs, all mine, all dated between March 2020 and now. I scanned them in disbelief, page after page describing delusional recollections, episodes of paranoia. Persistent belief patient wasn't admitted willingly. And then, the last page, scrawled in pencil, in a different handwriting. "Don't answer if he comes again." It's not the doctor. I stared at it, a chill rippling down my spine. The handwriting looked like my own. The sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped me out of my trance. Slow, deliberate steps, not rushed like a nurse responding to a call, not casual like a janitor finishing rounds. They were too evenly spaced, too careful, like someone was trying to be heard and not heard at the same time. I closed the folder quickly and slid it under the blanket on my bed, just as the handle on my door turned. The door opened. The doctor entered. The same one as before. Same neat coat. Same clipped tone. "I see you're awake again," he said. "That's good. We've been monitoring your condition closely." He pulled up the metal stool beside my bed and sat. His knees almost brushed the mattress. "I want to talk about your memory," he said. I nodded slowly. "You were admitted in March of 2020, he continued. "That's what your file says. That's what the system says." "But that's not true," I said. "I came in yesterday. I had a fall. I hit my head. That's all." He smiled politely. "That's the story you remember. But we've been caring for you since the start of the pandemic. You were in a coma for almost a year. You've been recovering ever since." "No," I said. "That's not what happened." I glanced down at his wrist. His watch. It was upside down. No one wears a watch like that. He followed my gaze, quickly pulled his sleeve down. "You've been confused," he said. "Delusions are common." "Then what about the note in my file?" He blinked. A flicker of something, hesitation maybe, passed through his eyes. There was no note. I read it. It was in my handwriting. He stood. His smile never wavered. "I think we'll adjust your medication. You're agitated." He turned to leave, and as he opened the door, I said it without thinking. "You're not the doctor." He paused, then turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his jawline. No pulse, no movement. The skin was smooth, too smooth. He shut the door behind him without another word. I waited 15 minutes. Then I opened the folder again. The note was gone. I packed what little I had. The shoes didn't fit right, like they'd been replaced. My hoodie smelled unfamiliar, like old plastic and ammonia. But I didn't care. I needed to get out. I crept down the hallway and turned toward the emergency exit. The alarm didn't go off when I pushed the door. Just silence. The stairwell was dark, but I didn't stop. I ran down 3 flights, burst into the back parking lot, and froze. There were no cars, not even mine. Just a lot full of dust, weeds poking through cracks in the pavement, and a flickering security light. Behind me, on the 3rd floor, a face appeared in one of the windows. Not mine, not the doctor's. A copy of me, smiling. I didn't wait. I ran. I ran until my lungs screamed and my legs gave out. I collapsed near the edge of the industrial park, just before the first line of homes. Someone found me, an actual someone, and called the police. There was no record of my admission, no record of any hospital operating at that location in the last year. The building was scheduled for demolition. Inside, they found a room full of broken equipment and patient files. None with names, just blank forms, and one sheet of paper tacked to the wall, half ripped, still fluttering in the draft. If he asks, "You've been here since March 2020. There's a reason I remember that night with such perfect clarity, because I've spent every day since trying to explain it to myself. And I can't. I was admitted to the hospital for what was supposed to be a routine observation. Chest pains, probably stress, maybe the beginnings of something worse. They kept me overnight for tests and hooked me up to monitors. Nothing dramatic. I was in room 302B, 3rd floor, end of the hall, next to the supply closet. I remember that now, like it's tattooed on the inside of my skull. It was quiet that evening, just the low hum of the machines and the occasional squeak of a cart being wheeled past my door. A nurse came in around 9:15 p.m. Short woman, maybe mid-40s, soft voice, sharp movements. Said she needed to give me an injection of something for my heart rate. I didn't question it. She cleaned my arm, inserted the needle, and told me to try and rest. I remember the sting. I remember the alcohol wipe. I remember the tiny round Band-Aid she pressed into place. Then I drifted off. It couldn't have been more than an hour later, when someone else came in. Same uniform, different nurse. Younger, blonde with tired eyes. She didn't speak much, just looked at my chart, pulled out a syringe and said, "All right, time for your injection." I sat up, confused. Wait, someone already gave me one. A woman. Maybe an hour ago. She frowned and shook her head, clearly thinking I was mistaken. "No, I'm your nurse for the night. First round now." I argued. She insisted. I showed her the Band-Aid. She peeled it off. The skin underneath was red. There was a puncture. But just to the left of it was another one. A second mark. Identical. Fresh. My mouth went dry. I must have stared at her for a full 10 seconds. She just looked at my arm, then quietly said, "That's odd." And she left the room without giving me anything. That's when I started to feel it. The cold. Not the kind that comes from an open window, but a deep kind of cold, like something in the room didn't belong. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and pressed the call button. No one came. I pressed it again. Nothing. Out in the hallway, I saw movement. Someone walked past the glass panel in my door. I got out of bed, carefully, with the IV still in my hand, and opened the door to look. The hallway was empty, except it wasn't. The light above the supply closet was flickering. That wasn't strange in itself, but the shadows it cast seemed wrong, like someone was standing there, just out of view. I closed the door again. I sat on the bed and stared at the Band-Aid in my hand. One injection was noted in the chart the next morning. No mention of a second one, and no one could confirm who the first nurse was. There was no nurse on the schedule who matched my description. And when I checked my arm later that week, both puncture marks were gone. But the scar I never had before? It's still there. I didn't talk about it at first. Who would believe it? 2 punctures, 1 nurse who wasn't on the schedule, a conversation no one else heard. It sounds like stress, like confusion, like a patient not sleeping right. And that's exactly what I told myself, for a while. But there was the scar, a faint, pale line right between where the 2 puncture marks had been. I noticed it on the 3rd day after discharge. It wasn't red or swollen, just there. New, but healed, as if it had always been part of me. Still, I kept my mouth shut, went back to work, paid bills, saw my doctor again for follow-up. Nothing was wrong. Blood pressure was fine, heart normal. They ran a full panel. Clean. Healthy. Except I'd started waking up in the middle of the night. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., I'd wake with a jolt. I never set an alarm. I never looked at the clock first. But when I did, it was always 3:17. I'd be sweating, heart pounding, with a strange feeling in my chest like something had been there and left. And then came the dreams. They weren't nightmares exactly, but they had a weight to them. I was always back in the hospital hallway, always walking slowly past the supply closet, drawn to the flickering light. In the dream, the door was always slightly open. I could never see inside, but I knew something was there, watching, not threatening, just observing, like it was taking notes. One night in the dream, I finally opened the door. There was nothing but an empty gurney, and on the gurney lay a sealed syringe, labeled with my name. I snapped awake. That morning, I found a small bruise on my forearm. Same place. No explanation. I started losing sleep, started forgetting things. I'd wake up with my shoes still on, or find the faucet in the bathroom running. Once, I woke up sitting on the floor of the kitchen, the fridge wide open, light buzzing like it was struggling to stay on. That same day, I went to the hospital records office and requested the shift log for the night I'd been admitted. They didn't want to give it to me, but I insisted. There were only 2 nurses assigned to my floor that night, the younger one who gave me the official shot, and a male orderly who covered the hallway for most of the evening. No one else. No one by the description I gave. No security footage of anyone else entering my room at that time. No charted medication given at 9:15 p.m. It was as if she never existed. But I remember her face, her voice, the sting of the needle. Someone gave me something. Something that never got recorded. 2 months after I left the hospital, I was still afraid to sleep. I'd moved the bed so I could see every corner of the room from where I lay. I started locking my bedroom door at night, sometimes twice, and I kept the hallway light on, like a child, because something in me had shifted. My instincts weren't quiet anymore. They were loud, insistent, screaming. The scar was still there. I wore long sleeves, and the bruises didn't stop. They'd appear faintly, every few days. Always in the same area. Always small, circular. One time, I found 3, perfectly aligned. I went back to the hospital, not to the ER, not to my doctor, but to the night shift nurse who had officially treated me. I found her during a coffee break in the staff lounge, sitting alone. I asked her straight out, "Do you remember who else was with you that night?" She looked up from her cup slowly. Her eyes narrowed. Then, carefully, she set her mug down and leaned closer. "There wasn't anyone else," she said. "I was the only one on that side of the floor. We were short-staffed. I remember." I nodded, heart hammering. "And the supply closet across from room 302? "What about it?" she asked. "There was a woman in white. Said she was giving me a shot." The nurse went still. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "That closet's been locked for years." She stood, visibly shaken, and left the lounge. I sat alone for a long time, staring at the steam rising from her abandoned coffee. That was the last time I went back. I've since changed cities, changed jobs. But I still check my arms every morning, still watch the clock late at night, and still, at 3:17, something shifts in the air. A few weeks ago, I woke up and found something on my nightstand that hadn't been there before. A syringe, empty, no label, no explanation. But right where the needle would have gone, a single, fresh mark.